Hey, welcome back. Remember to drop a like to feed this fluffy like eating chinchilla. r/AskReddit. Did you ever snoop through your parents' things as a child and absolutely regret what you found to this day? What was it in it they ever find out? NSFW. Found a letter about a kid my mom gave up for adoption when she was 18. Weird to think my mom had a whole different life before I came along when she was 27. My dad's journal from before I was born. He was so incredibly depressed. He talked about how my older sister cried on her way to kindergarten and it was the first time he'd been able to relate to her in years. Totally broke my heart. I've never told him though. That was definitely not meant for me to read. I wasn't snooping, but when I was about 14 I was helping mom do laundry like I usually did on Saturdays when I was a kid. I went to put away my dad's shirts and found a Costco-sized box of condoms. It was nearly full. On its own that didn't bother me. I knew what sex was and figured my parents did it. The troublesome bit was the following Saturday when I was helping with laundry and saw 3 condoms in the drawer instead of tilde 24. I mean, damn guys, it's been a week. Dang, they are animals. Unfortunately, yes. My dad's father was a fighter pilot during World War II. Immediately after the war, he was still flying for the Air Force when he crashed his plane into a mountain and died on his way home from a training mission. My dad had a bunch of artifacts from the wreckage, small things that they could bring off the mountain. It took 2 weeks of searching to find the wreckage, and 5 days of hiking up the mountain to get there, which he got after his mom passed away. I was 14. A couple of years later, I wanted to show the artifacts to a friend. Went in my dad's closet to find them, but what I found instead was a 12-inch long, thick, black dildo. I immediately closed the bag it was in, and never went looking for the artifacts again. However, a few years later, I was about 20, and dating this guy. My parents were out of town for the weekend, so he was staying over at my house. He thought of himself as a musician, and asked if we could record him singing and playing guitar. So, I got out the video recorder, and, not wanting to record over anything important, I played the tape that was in it to be sure. It was a homemade sex tape my parents made. I about died. Thankfully I didn't actually see them doing it, because it was right at the beginning, still fully clothed, making out on their bed. I knocked out of that real quick. Never did record him singing. Which is fine cause he sucked. That was a roller coaster. When I was a kid I looked through my parents' closet while they weren't there and found anal beads. I didn't know what they were, but they were squishy, so I put them in my mouth and chewed them. We snooped through a friend's parents' room looking for weed and found a butt plug. We assumed it was the mom's, but found out later it was for his dad. A few years later it came up in conversation around his younger brother, and apparently his younger brother and his friends also found it. But they took it out to play with it, and I guess it came in contact with one of his friend's lips. My dad always acted like he was dirt poor even though I knew otherwise. He would always have an excuse to not go somewhere or to do stuff with me and my brother that had him spending money. Well, one day my dad and brother went to the store, so I snuck in his computer room and went through his filing cabinet. There were his bank records, and sure enough he had over $50K in the bank just collecting interest. He'd take 1 week out of the year and go on vacation, but it would only be him and whoever he was dating. Never once took my brother, and I always left me heartbroken knowing that my dad would rather make excuses than to spend time with his own kids. On a side note, after I found the bank's records I snooped through his computer and found all the porn sites he was paying for. My parents had this box of unlabeled VHS tapes, all with blank white sleeves, in their closet. Finally home alone one day and sneak one into the VCR, and what title pops up? Vagina Town. I was born in that town. Remember, you can never go home. I found a riding crop in my parents' wardrobe. I was like, when the fuck did we get a horse? Bum paddle. When I was about 15 we moved from one town to another. While moving, somehow some photographs fell out of the back of the drawer that my sister, 3 years older, and I were lifting out of the van. Our hands were full and we both looked at those photographs spread on the sidewalk. Pictures of our mother with a dog leash on her neck and panties with a hole in which her bleep peeked through. Also more hardcore porn pictures of the woman that we call Mom. We looked at each other not sure what to do and proceeded to get that drawer inside. When we got back out the pictures had gone. Our mom/dad must have picked it up. Or the neighbor? Anyway, no word was ever spoken about it. Even my sis and I never did. This one is my favorite. After reading this thread for at least 20 minutes, I hope the knowledge that your trauma brings others joy is some consolation. When I was a kid, there were no such thing as cell phones, and we didn't have magazines, so going to the bathroom was pretty boring. One way I used to entertain myself was by playing with a round piece of rubber that sat in the medicine cabinet. I would poke it, stretch it, spin it on my finger. Wasn't until several years later during sex ed that it suddenly dawned on me that I had been playing with my mother's diaphragm that whole time. Her what? Her diaphragm. I was going through my dad's hockey bag. Found his cup, thought it was a face mask. It wasn't till I saw the horrified look on my parents' face that I realized it's not for your face. When I was little, I always liked going in my parents' closet. Their closet is above the garage, so it is massive. There aren't any windows, so I liked going there during the day to be in the dark. They kept a lot of random stuff in the very back, so I always thought it was fun to go through. It wasn't until it got around Christmas time, when my parents said I was not allowed to go in their closet anymore, which naturally made me want to go in there even more. I waited until they were distracted with something and went in. I went to the very back, where I like to explore, and found a bunch of wrapped Christmas presents. A few weeks later I got those same presents, but from Santa. This really confused me as an 8-year-old. Why would Santa bring the gifts early just to have to come back later to out them out on Christmas Eve? I guess it must make it easier, and definitely would make the sleigh lighter. Yeah, that makes sense. Can't be doing all that gifting all in one night. Plus it explains why your parents left cookies and milk out for him. They had an established relationship from when he dropped stuff off earlier in the year. You nailed it, mate. My parents got divorced when my dad was caught cheating on my mom. After the divorce, I went to visit my dad in Louisiana when I was about 13. I decided to snoop through his bin of floppy disks and found a very long story he had typed out during the divorce. In it he describes graphic sexual acts with the new woman. How his life would be easier if my mom was to suddenly drop dead. Specifically that he would fantasize about the police showing up at his door to tell him my mom was killed in a car accident. I also learned how his AOL name that he'd been using for years is actually just an inside joke between him and his now wife about the length of his dick. He still uses that name to this day. He did find out that I saw it, and he explained that at the time of the divorce he was seeing a therapist who told him to write the story. I think it was meant for the therapist to read and gain some insight into what my dad was going through. I found my paranoid schizophrenic father's diary full of rants, including him accusing my mother of adultery and her denials. It was just so sad and messed up, a really awful peek inside his mind. I knew he was sick, but to get that honest a look inside was far too much for a 10-year-old. I admitted to my mother what I found. When I went back to look at the notebook another time, I saw she'd ripped out all the pages. We'd run away from him years before. I have no idea why she kept the thing. Not exactly as a child, but after I went to college my parents rearranged and put their old bed in my room. It was the type that had a lot of drawers for storage under it, and they were filled with extra winter clothes. One day I was home on break and looking for some mittens or something, and found a letter that my mom's ex-boyfriend wrote to her when he heard she was moving in with my dad. It was all weird rambling, nice guy bullshit where he tries to pose as sensitive and poetic while also letting her know that he was butthurt because she refused to live with him when they were dating, and that he hoped it didn't work out between her and my dad. I don't know much about their relationship, but at the time the letter was written they must have been broken up for years and she was living in a different state. Also, when I was stalked by an ex, she did mention that she could relate, and I think she was talking about him. So obviously not a good dude, no matter how much he loved moonlit bicycle rides in the desert or whatever. I have no idea why she kept it, since to get in this drawer it must have been packed up, moved, and unpacked many times. But for the record, my parents have been married for nearly 30 years and are still going strong, so fuck you random dude. I found a CD in their room that was just white. There wasn't any writing on it or anything. Being the stupid child that I was, I went to put it in our family DVD player anyways. I realize now that what I had watched for a few seconds was actually a porn video. Parents walked in and yelled at me and my sister. I asked what the people were doing on TV. My parents replied with, wrestling, and shut it off. When I was 15 I was digging through my father's closet trying to find a Santa hat he hid. My parents had recently separated, so he was living alone and I was visiting for the holidays. What I found was heartbreaking. I found letters, pictures and printed emails from the woman he has been having an affair with for years. I place everything back as it was and went next door to my grandparents' house where my father and the rest of his side of the family was decorating the Christmas tree. I sat silence glaring at him until he took me home to my mother's. I told her what I had found and handed her my key so she could retrieve it and turn it over to her divorce attorney. As I was 4, I found a vibrator you can put on your penis. It was made out of leather and you could still put it in a vagina even with your penis in it. So it took me 3 more years till I realized what it was. I shook in that moment. You remember being 4? Shit. Edit. Have 4-year-old. Should probably watch my mouth better. Found my mom and stepfather's sex drawer one day. Fucking horrifying. How is an under TV drawer the perfect place for VHS porn and dildos? Hideous. After my mother passed, I was organizing her affects and I found a sex toy, and I'm pretty sure I found some nudes. Remember in Ghostbusters when Winston Zeddemore was like, "I've seen shit that would turn you white"? I was very, very Caucasian that day. Thanks for watching. Remember, every like puts Mario Chinchilla closer to finding his gold coins.